I use Trainer Road, but do all of the workouts outside. I'm like you and hate indoor training. Yes, I personally don't like doing indoor training, but I wouldn't say I hate indoor training. I think it's a good tool, and I coach riders that do pretty much exclusively indoor training. So I wouldn't say I hate it. I personally just don't do it. Just to clear the air there. I do have the ramp test pop into my schedule every 4 weeks. Can't do it as I don't have an indoor trainer anymore. What FTP test would you recommend instead of the ramp test? I do like to see how I'm progressing so that my workouts are achievable. That's what I wanted to get into in this video. So I just wanted to first off question the frequency of that FTP testing. So Trainer Road saying do an FTP test every 4 weeks. I would push back on that and I'd question that. So the first thing you have to look at is what phase of training are you in? Now, if you're doing an FTP test every 4 weeks, that means you would be expecting to see an FTP increase every 4 weeks, which means you'd be in some sort of build or progression phase of your training, preparing for a specific event or in the lead into your race season. And that phase of training isn't something you're going to be able, not phase of training, that sort of intensity and load of training isn't going to be something you're doing for 6 or 8 months on end. It's something that it's a finite period of time. For example, you might do 12 weeks. You might do 12 weeks of really specific intense training, which in theory on paper might justify an FTP test every 4 weeks. If you're just say in your, let's say, base training, or let's say a period of time in the year where you don't have any racing on, or you're not doing any specific goals, you might not necessarily be looking for an FTP increase every 4 weeks. Just because you're training doesn't always mean your FTP should be going up. There's periods of time, maybe in winter, where you're happy for your FTP just to sit stable. You're still training, you're working on some other things, preparing yourself for FTP increases in the future. But there's certainly no need to be doing an FTP test every 4 weeks. And in fact, you wouldn't be expecting your FTP to actually be going up. You might be quite happy just with maintaining it. If you are in a 10 or 12 week build phase where you're looking to see a distinct increase in your threshold power, I would question why you're doing an FTP test every 4 weeks, because there needs to be some element, firstly, of faith in the training program. You should be confident in your training you're doing and have faith that the training that you're doing will see you the benefit you want to get at the end of the training block as you do your event or as you go into your race season. If you're wanting to do an FTP test every 4 weeks, it might, to me, that kind of shows you don't really have 100% faith that what you're doing is actually working. Because you should be able to go away, put your head down, get the training done, pop your head up 12 weeks later, test yourself, and then you can see the benefit you got. You shouldn't need that super frequent FTP testing. Other thing on this as well is that it shouldn't take, during, let's say, a 12-week progression, it shouldn't take an FTP test, going out and testing yourself maximally, to see that you're actually getting fitter. You should be able to, or you or a coach or some sort of whatever software you're using, should be able to infer an increase in fitness from the training data. So for example, just for yourself, you should be able to go out and if you're doing sessions at a similar power week to week, you should feel that the effort level goes down. I mean, you can look at things like heart rate, but really effort level is the gold standard. You go out and you do your threshold efforts and you go out and you do them the next week and you're doing it the same power. What you should be looking for is things like they feel a little bit easier, or you can do more power for the same effort level. And you can use, you should be doing those things to be a positive experience and go, yep, I'm definitely getting fitter here. I can feel a difference in terms of how I feel and the power I'm doing. I don't really need to go and do an FTP test. I can feel that I'm getting fitter from the training data. And that's really what I'd encourage you to spend more time doing, as opposed to just going out with a blunt force instrument and just FTP test every 4 weeks. FTP test every 4 weeks. If you do choose to do an FTP test every 4 weeks, I do have concerns. First thing is related to the mental stress of doing an FTP test every 4 weeks. That means you really only have 3 weeks of training, which isn't that much. And then you're going into your testing week where you got that bloody test on your calendar and it's causing you a lot of stress. And mentally, I do think that would be adding a level of stress which could potentially impact your overall recovery, your overall stress balance, and just be actually a hindrance to your overall adaptation to the exercise you're doing. It's just another thing, another hurdle getting in your way, where you should be focusing on just doing really good productive training. So there's a mental side of things there. Then you've got the pure logistical problem where every 4th week that test comes around, which this gets mentioned elsewhere. This is nothing new, but every 4th week that test comes around and you want to be fresh for it, so you do good numbers. So then you're potentially doing 2 or 3 lighter days going into it, so you've got good legs. So then every 4th week, you're basically interrupting your training with a testing week. Now you might have every 4th week, if you're doing the classic sort of 3 weeks building, 1 week slightly lighter, instead of having that lighter week, you're then having a testing week. Or if you're doing something different, maybe you're doing 4-week progressions, you then got this awkward testing week in there. So just purely from a training prescription point of view, I don't think it's ideal having that in there. It just doesn't really work most of the time. And then moving on, let's say you do put that in there. What's to say that you have a good week a good day every 4th week? What happens if you're just having a bit of an off day and that's the day you got your FTP test and the numbers aren't as good as they were the 4 weeks before? It's really, when you're introducing testing that frequently, you're really gambling with your body's response, because the body doesn't respond to training linearly in a straight line. It's ups and downs and ups and downs. And if you happen to have an FTP test on one of those downs, then you'll throw yourself mentally through a loop, and then what was the point of doing it in the first place? So I'd say, even just from that point of view, it's not that good testing every 4th week. So what would I recommend testing point of view? I would recommend it's worth doing a test at the start of some sort of training phase or training progression, so you can see where you're starting and provide some benchmark numbers. And then I'd say, ideally, don't test yourself until the end. That's introducing the least amount of interference with the training. That would be, physiologically and mentally, that would be the perfect way to do things. So you might do a 12-week progression, test yourself in the first week. Once you freshen up at the end of the 12 weeks, maybe as you're going into before your event or as you're going into your racing, test yourself then, and that could work well. If you're really keen and you feel like you're really getting good fitness increases, you could test yourself maybe once in the middle of that 12 weeks. So maybe on the 6th week you could do one. But even then, I would say that would only be if you're really feeling good and you're just desperate to go out and do an FTP test. I'd say I wouldn't force yourself to do that test at all. Now, to actually answer the original question, the question was about, I can't do a ramp test because I don't have a trainer. What test should I do? Look, the most obvious one, the most common one, is just doing a 20-minute test. Pretty simple, quite easy to do. If you're any sort of experienced cyclist, you can pace a 20-minute test pretty well. So that would be the go-to one I recommend. But it depends on what you're testing for. But I think the comment mentioned here, I want to test so that I'm progressing my work. I want to see how I'm progressing so that my workouts are achievable, which makes me think this commenter wants to do a test so that the FTP number is accurate, in which case, yes, doing a 20-minute test and then taking a percentage of that is a pretty good way at estimating FTP, although that's not perfect. But if you're just doing FTP tests, not for that point of view, not to update your FTP, but just as a way to see if you're improving from your training, I'd say actually pick a more fun way to do not an FTP test. Pick a fun way to test yourself. So it doesn't need to be going out and doing exactly 20 minutes or doing a ramp test. A fun way might be, if you've got a local climb that's of a decent length, test at the start of the training block, go and do a max effort up there. Maybe it's like an 8-minute long climb or something like that. And then midway through your training block, you test yourself up there again and see if you're actually climbing faster, see if your power's gone up for that segment. It's just more of a fun way to be testing yourself, I find, over a specific segment that's local to you, that's really easy to get to and that you enjoy doing, as opposed to doing a specific duration, which can be quite mind-numbing. And you're actually getting seeing an actual on-the-road speed benefit, opposed to just this number increasing in this sort of trainer test. And you're also getting the added benefit that you're doing it on the road, with road conditions, so it's actually applicable to the racing you're doing, assuming that you're someone who's doing some sort of road racing or road events. So consider that as well. It doesn't need to be one of the standard ramp tests or 20-minute tests. that's all I wanted to cover in this video, just my thoughts, comments on just doing FTP tests in general. Thanks for watching this far, if you got this far in, and I'll catch you in the next one.